composing and conducting have always been part of the same activity for me. I don't really see any separation between the two activities. And one very much feeds the other, so that when I'm conducting, I'm learning about composing, how to be a better composer, and vice versa. In fact, I've always thought that before the 20th century, you were called a musician, and that was that. There wasn't such a desire to put people in a pigeonhole, into a box. You have to be either a performer or a conductor or a composer. You were a musician. And I've always been very glad that I'm able, as it were, to use the different sides of what it means to be a musician. So when I play the piano, I'm still having the contact, very important contact with sound, and again that informs everything I do as a composer and as a conductor. And then of course you go back in history, you look at all of these great figures who were both active as composers and conductors, Mahler, Strauss, of course, and also in England, Elgar. And there's this sense with their music that you know that they were great practical musicians, because if you look at the detail of a Mahler score or an Elgar score, you know that everything is there because of some deep practical knowledge. The writing for the strings is beautifully idiomatic, and there's this sense that everything they do as a composer comes from having tried out in performance ideas, and that's where everything comes from. Literature is, alongside music, the great joy and love of my life, and I spend a lot of my time thinking of texts which can be sung intelligibly, which is difficult because you need to have a text with a sort of lyric quality which is not too complicated so that the ear cannot catch the meaning, but also texts which can be amplified by being aligned with music. So it's one of the most difficult things about being a composer, is finding these perfect texts. I spent the last 4 years of my life working on a libretto of an opera based on Shakespeare, The Winter's Tale, and spending 4 years with the greatest English poet was an incredible privilege and taught me a lot about this business of the sung text. And it's, of course, to do with my love of working with singers. From when I was very young, I always worked closely with singers, both as an accompanist or as a coach for operatic repertoire. And that connection with the singing voice is of primary importance for me. When I was invited by the Grafenegg Festival to be composer in residence and commissioned to write a piece, we began to speak about possible programs, and we decided that Bruckner's Ninth Symphony was to be the main event in this program. So, of course, as a composer, I began to think of how to write a work which can complement this great symphony, great masterpiece. And I began to think a lot about Bruckner's incomplete finale for that symphony and how aspects of that finale could inform my piece. And I came to the idea of setting for soprano and orchestra a text which is an ancient Austrian-Bavarian hymn, Der Heiland ist erstanden, which is a text Bruckner was obsessed with in the final year of his life. He was constantly praying this text, and of course the text is to do with Easter and resurrection, and somehow the finale of his symphony was to be this great joyful ode to Easter. So in fact very optimistic, unlike the adagio of the symphony, which is incredibly full of angst and torment. So I wanted these ideas from Bruckner's finale to be present in the first half of our concert and in my piece. I was very happy a few years ago to be invited by Franz Welser-Möst to be the composer in residence with the Cleveland Orchestra, and he performed two of my works there with that wonderful, wonderful orchestra. And it's also a wonderful and happy coincidence that he will perform Bruckner's Fifth Symphony with the Vienna Philharmonic in the festival where I'm also performing the Ninth Symphony. And of course he is immersed in Bruckner's language, and I've heard many performances of his, mainly with the Cleveland Orchestra of Bruckner, and it's wonderful to have these two great symphonies together. For me personally, one of the great pleasures about coming to Grafenegg will be to learn more about the great Austrian wines. Wine is a wonderful part of my life. I enjoy it very much. And Austrian wine is a sort of unknown for me. And I've had some very small lessons from Till Fellner about great Austrian wine, and I'm very excited indeed about learning more and trying more and tasting more.